The streets outside my window were already alive with the sounds of the city, the honking cars, the shouts of street vendors, the distant wail of sirens that never seemed to stop. I pulled on my worn shoes, grabbed the small bag I always carried with me, and stepped out. Every day felt like a fight to survive, like the world had built invisible walls to keep people like me in our place. I sold small handmade items, things I stitched myself, moving from street to street, hoping for someone to notice, someone to care. Most of the time, people just walked past, their eyes sliding over me as if I were air. That day, however, something was different. I didn't know it yet, but fate had already begun writing its own story. I was crossing the busiest part of the city, balancing my bag filled with a few handmade trinkets when I noticed him. He was standing a little apart from the crowd, tall, impeccably dressed, the kind of person you couldn't help but notice even if you tried. I had seen people like him before. Millionaires, wealthy men who lived in glass towers, far removed from streets like mine. They looked down on people like me, sometimes with pity, sometimes with disdain, but mostly with indifference. I didn't think twice. I kept moving, hoping he wouldn't notice me. Then, in a moment so fast I couldn't even process it, we collided. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a brief bump, but I instinctively reached out to steady him, and in that instant, our bodies pressed together for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I froze, my heart racing, a rush of embarrassment flooding me. But then, something completely unexpected happened. He didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at me, really looked. And there was something in his eyes that made me stop breathing. Curiosity? Surprise? Recognition? I couldn't tell. It was only a hug, a small, accidental embrace. But it was like the world had tilted for a moment. His warmth, the faint scent of something expensive I couldn't name, the way he held on to me for just a fraction longer than socially acceptable, it left me shaken. I hurried away, pretending it didn't happen, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every step I took, I felt a strange pull, like invisible threads were tying my world to his. But life has a cruel way of testing you, especially when something extraordinary happens. Rumors spread quickly, even in a city that barely notices people like me. Whispers reached my ears. Eyes followed me where they shouldn't. And I could feel judgment pressing down on me in ways I had learned to expect. But never this intensely. People looked at me differently, their expressions a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and outright disbelief. I was just a poor girl trying to survive. But suddenly, I had stepped into a story bigger than me, a story that people would talk about whether I wanted them to or not. Meanwhile, he seemed oblivious to the chaos that surrounded me. Or maybe he just didn't care. He continued with his life of luxury, of meetings and events, and people who flattered him constantly. But even in his world of wealth, I could sense a loneliness, a quiet emptiness hidden behind his confident exterior. It was strange, almost unbelievable, how two people from worlds so different could be pulled into each other's orbit in such a simple, accidental moment. And yet, the city didn't forgive that kind of collision. It wasn't supposed to happen. The rich and poor were meant to stay separated, each confined to their invisible cages. As the day went on, small incidents started to pile up, though I didn't notice them at first. A shopkeeper turned me away, saying they didn't have time for people like me. A passerby muttered something cruel as I walked past. The air itself seemed heavier, loaded with the silent weight of all the rules I was never allowed to break. And somewhere, in the background, I could feel his presence looming, not in person, but in the thought of that hug, in the memory of that accidental touch that shouldn't have meant anything, but had meant everything. That night, As I returned to my tiny room, I sat on the edge of my mattress and tried to make sense of what had happened. I was tired, scared, and exhilarated all at once. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with the possibilities, the what-ifs, the dangers, and the thrill of something entirely unexpected entering my life. I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Something big, life-changing was coming, and there was no turning back. I didn't know it yet, but the hug had set off a chain of events I could never have imagined. Two worlds had collided, and the city, in its harsh, indifferent way, was already testing whether that collision could survive. I felt fear, yes, but also a strange flicker of hope. For the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was possible. And I knew, somehow, impossibly, that I would never be the same again. The next morning, I woke up with that same strange, heavy feeling pressing on my chest. I couldn't shake the memory of that accidental hug. It kept replaying over and over in my mind, each time leaving me breathless and restless. I had tried to tell myself it was nothing, that it was just a fleeting moment in a city full of strangers. But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. It was as if the universe had reached into my life and shaken it, asking me to notice something I'd long been ignoring. That maybe, somehow, my life could intersect with someone else's in ways that mattered. I stepped outside into the crowded streets, holding my small bag tightly, my eyes scanning the usual sea of people who never paused to notice me. Yet, that day felt different. Every glance felt heavier. Every whisper carried weight. I could feel the city watching me in a way I'd never felt before. Shopkeepers who had never smiled now stared curiously, their eyes flicking to where I had been the day before, where I had collided with him, where everything had changed. It wasn't just about the hug anymore. It was about what that hug represented. A poor girl from the streets had touched the life of a man who seemed untouchable, and the world didn't like it. And it began to push back. The first incident was small, almost insignificant, but it stung. I had approached a stall to sell some of my handmade items, only to have the vendor wave me away, muttering something about people like me slowing down business. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my hands shaking as I clutched my bag. I had faced this before, people turning their noses up at me. But this time, it felt amplified, magnified by the memory of that hug, by the feeling that somehow I didn't belong here, that somehow I was being punished for daring to exist outside my place in this city. And then there were the whispers. I could feel them slicey, staying through the air, through the crowds. Strangers who never knew me somehow seemed to know my story. A few muttered cruel things about me, about who I was, about the audacity of a girl like me touching someone like him. I wanted to ignore it, wanted to brush it off like I always did. But the fear, the shame, the anger, they started to build inside me, knotting tightly in my chest. It was suffocating. Meanwhile, he existed in his own world, one of luxury and privilege that seemed untouchable. I didn't know how much he noticed the chaos that had begun to surround me, or if he did at all. But I could sense a presence, a pull from somewhere in the distance, as though we were connected by invisible threads that neither of us fully understood. I caught glimpses of him in my mind's eye, standing in his polished office, checking his watch, glancing out the window. And for some reason, I knew he couldn't stop thinking about that moment either. That hug had unsettled something in him too. It had cracked the surface of his perfect, controlled life, exposing him to emotions he hadn't felt in years. The tension built slowly, like the city itself was pressing down on us both. Every day became a challenge. Every interaction, every glance, every small step forward was a struggle. I felt the unfairness of it all. How my poverty, my struggle, my very existence seemed to be measured and judged. While he could navigate his world freely, shielded by wealth and status, I watched as he faced his own pressure, whispers in his circles, people questioning why he was distracted, why he seemed so interested in someone so far beneath him. It was ridiculous. It was unjust. And yet, neither of us could ignore it. Amid all this, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when the world seemed to pause. Stolen glances across crowded streets, brief exchanges of understanding in the most ordinary places, the flashes of connection that felt more powerful than anything either of us had expected. Those moments kept me going, giving me hope that maybe this collision of worlds could survive the weight of everything around us. But the city is never kind to anomalies. Just when it felt like something could grow, obstacles appeared. A cruel comment, a misunderstanding, someone's eyes watching us with suspicion or judgment. Every time, I felt my courage tested, my heart stretched between fear and hope. By the end of that week, I was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The city had a way of chewing people up and spitting them out if they dared to step out of their expected place. And yet, something in me refused to back down. That hug had awakened a spark, a realization that I was more than the world allowed me to be. And somewhere, in his world of marble floors and tailored suits, I sensed that he felt it too. We were both standing at the edge of something enormous, teetering between fear and courage, between the life we knew and the life that might be possible if we dared to step forward. I remember walking home that night, my legs aching from the day, my mind spinning with what had happened, what might happen, and what could never be imagined. The city lights flickered above me, casting long shadows across the street, and I felt the weight of everything pressing down. The judgment, the whispers, the impossible gap between our worlds. But alongside that weight, there was something else. Anticipation. A strange thrill. A tiny heartbeat of hope that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary was about to happen. And in that moment, I realized that life was no longer ordinary. The collision had already happened, and now it was time to see what would come of it. Would we survive the pressure? Would the connection forged in that accidental hug hold against the relentless weight of the world? Or would it crumble, leaving us both to retreat to our separate, lonely lives? I didn't know the answer yet, but I felt it, deep in my bones, that whatever came next, it would change me forever. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope stretched over a city that seemed determined to knock me off. Every morning I stepped outside, the air itself seemed heavier, buzzing with the weight of invisible judgment. Whispers trailed behind me, glances lingered a second too long, and even strangers' smiles felt like riddles I wasn't allowed to solve. I had always known the world was unfair, that people like me were measured, dismissed, and overlooked. But now, after that accidental hug, after the moment that should have meant nothing, it felt as though the entire city had decided I had dared to step out of my place. He had started noticing too, though I didn't see him often. From what I glimpsed through the newspapers, through the occasional public sighting, he was different, more distracted, more human. His usual confidence, the air of untouchable perfection, seemed shaken. I didn't understand how he could even notice me amidst his life of luxury, but somehow he did. And that realization both terrified and exhilarated me. For the first time, I felt like someone saw me, not the poor, struggling girl, but the person I was underneath. Then came the first real test. I was trying to sell a few of my trinkets near the market when a man stepped in front of me, blocking my path. His eyes were hard, judgmental. "You don't belong here," he said, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the bustle around us. "Go back to where you came from." My stomach tightened, my hands trembled, and I felt my face flush with heat. I had heard these words before, countless times, but now they hit differently. Now, I was aware that someone powerful might be watching, someone whose life could be touched by me in ways I didn't yet understand. And I swallowed my fear and stepped around him, clutching my bag like it was armor. It wasn't just words. Doors started closing in ways I had never experienced before. People who had tolerated my presence before now crossed the street to avoid me. I felt the sting of every glance, every whispered comment, every judgment that was louder than any shout. The city seemed alive with forces I could not see, but could feel pressing against me, threatening to erase me from the spaces I had always survived in. And yet, I couldn't step back. Somehow, I couldn't allow the world to dictate who I could be in that single moment of chance. Meanwhile, he was facing his own challenges. Rumors had begun circulating, questions raised in hushed tones. "Why are you so interested in her?" they asked. "It's improper. It's scandalous." And yet, every time he thought of me, every time that accidental hug crept into his mind, he felt a pull stronger than any social expectation, any polite caution. I didn't know the extent of his struggle, but I could feel it somehow, as if invisible threads tied us together, tugging each of us towards something that neither of us could ignore. Then, one afternoon, the situation escalated. I had gone to a cafe, hoping for a few coins from selling my handmade items nearby, when a group of people started whispering, pointing. Someone spilled a drink near me on purpose, an act so small, yet so deliberate, meant to humiliate. My hands shook as I wiped it away, my heart pounding. People laughed quietly, thinking no one noticed. But I noticed, and somewhere in the chaos, I sensed him too, watching from a distance, powerless to intervene, but undeniably present. The injustice of it all hit me like a wave. Every act of cruelty, every microaggression, every obstacle thrown in my path. It was all magnified now because of that hug, because of the connection it represented. And yet, even in the darkest moments, there were flickers of hope. Stolen glances in the street, brief encounters where someone offered help without judgment, moments with ease. The world seemed to pause long enough for us to notice each other. Those moments were fragile, fleeting, yet they were enough to remind me that not everything was lost. That maybe, just maybe, a life so different from mine could intersect with mine in ways that mattered. But the city never forgives anomalies for long. Just as I began to gather courage, just as I began to feel that the impossible could happen, another obstacle appeared. A misunderstanding, a whisper, a glance turned wrong. It felt as if the universe was testing me, pushing me to my limits. I felt fear, frustration, and anger all at once. A cocktail so intense it made me want to scream, to run, to hide. But I couldn't. Not now. Not when something so fragile and precious was dangling just within reach. And through it all, he remained in my thoughts, a constant presence in a world that seemed determined to erase me. I imagined him watching the chaos, feeling helpless and frustrated, struggling against forces he couldn't control. I felt a strange connection, a pull that grew stronger with every act of injustice, every moment of fear, every flicker of hope. We were both being tested, both pushed to our limits, both standing on the edge of something that could either destroy us or transform us completely. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, my body trembling, my mind spinning with everything that had happened that day. I sat on the edge of the small step outside my room, clutching my bag tightly, feeling the city's weight pressing down. But amid the exhaustion, amid the fear, there was a spark, a flicker of defiance, a whisper of hope that refused to be silenced. I had survived this far. I had endured the cruel whispers, the small humiliations, the invisible barriers, and I knew that the story was far from over. Something was coming, something I couldn't yet see, something that would push me to the breaking point, the collision between our worlds, the rich and the poor, the untouchable and the struggling, was inevitable. And when it happened, when the impossible became real, I would have to face it with all the courage I could muster. Because whether I wanted it or not, my life, his life, and the invisible rules that separated us were about to be tested in ways neither of us could have imagined. I never imagined fear could feel so sharp, so heavy, so all-consuming. That day, it pressed down on me like the entire city had decided I didn't deserve to breathe. I was walking down a narrow street, trying to ignore the whispers, the stares, the way the air seemed to weigh differently around me. My hands gripped my bag tightly, knuckles white, my heart pounding as though it might leap out of my chest. Everything I had endured so far, the insults, the closed doors, the invisible barriers, was nothing compared to what was about to happen. And then I saw him. He had appeared from nowhere, standing at the edge of the street, looking at me with that strange, piercing intensity that had haunted my thoughts for days. Relief surged through me, quickly followed by panic. I couldn't let anyone see us, not here, not now. The city had already decided I didn't belong, and one look from him might make it worse, draw attention, invite judgment. I froze, my breath caught, and yet the pull between us was undeniable. It started with a word, a careless, cruel remark from someone nearby. A stranger sneered, muttering about who I was, where I came from, how I had no right to exist in this space. The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I felt all the tension, all the prejudice, all the injustice that had shadowed me for years, crash down in a single moment. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, but something inside me flared. I straightened my back, refusing to be invisible, refusing to let the world win. He stepped forward, his presence breaking through the suffocating pressure, shielding me without a word. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't power, it was something deeper, something almost impossible to describe. He was taking a risk, challenging the invisible walls that had held me down, and I could feel his courage intertwining with mine. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about a hug, or chance, or curiosity. It was about defying everything that tried to keep us apart, about confronting injustice head-on, about claiming our right to exist as fully human, no matter what the world said. The tension escalated faster than I could process. Someone moved toward us, their expression sharp, accusing. A door slammed in the background, the sound echoing like a warning. I felt my pulse in my ears, my chest tightening with adrenaline, and I realized that one wrong step could undo everything. But then he looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I had never expected. Unwavering belief. Belief that I deserved this moment, that I deserved to be seen, that I deserved to be treated as a person, not an invisible statistic. And then it happened. A confrontation, sharp and unavoidable, that threw everything into chaos. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the world seemed to tilt around us. I felt anger, fear, helplessness, and hope all at once. Every injustice I had faced, the subtle slights, the whispered judgments, the doors closed in my face, surfaced in a single heartbeat. And yet, amid the storm, there was a strange clarity. This was it. The point where the story could either break us or forge something stronger, something unshakable. I remember gripping my bag like a lifeline, my hands trembling, my heart racing. I could feel him beside me, steady and strong, offering a shield I had never known I could rely on. Every glance, Frau, and the crowd felt like a test, every movement, a potential disaster. And yet, we moved through it together, step by step, as though some invisible force had tied our fates together. I realized in that moment that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it, standing up to injustice even when the odds were stacked impossibly high. The confrontation reached its peak. Words were thrown like knives, stares cut sharper than blades, and for a fleeting second, I thought everything might shatter. But then something remarkable happened. The world around us paused, as if it were holding its breath. He took my hand, gently, deliberately, and the tension shifted. In that small gesture, a message was sent louder than any words could convey. We would not be broken. We would not be silenced. And in that instant, I felt the impossible, the invisible barriers, the harsh judgments, the city itself, start to bend, just slightly, in our favor. As the moment passed, the air felt lighter, though still charged with anticipation. The city hadn't changed. The injustices hadn't vanished. But something fundamental had shifted between us. The hug that had seemed so small, so insignificant, had set off a chain reaction neither of us could have predicted. It had exposed fear, injustice, and vulnerability, and also courage, connection, and the power to challenge what society deemed impossible. And as I walked home that night, my legs exhausted, my heart still racing, I realized that life would never be the same. I had faced the worst of the city's scrutiny, the sharpest edges of prejudice, and yet I had survived. Together, we had survived. The invisible walls between our worlds had been challenged, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew something profound had begun. Something life-altering, something that could no longer be ignored. The question lingered in my mind, echoing with every step. Could a single act of courage, a single choice to defy injustice, really change lives? Could it be enough to bend the world, even just slightly, to let love, connection, and humanity exist where it had been denied? I didn't have the answer yet, but I felt it, that the turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. When the dust finally settled, I stood there, breathing hard, my heart still racing, but with a strange, unshakable calm washing over me. The city hadn't changed. The streets were just as crowded, the air just as sharp. But I had changed. And somehow, in that brief, intense collision of worlds, he had changed too. That accidental hug, the thing that had seemed so small and meaningless, had become the pivot point of everything that followed. It had tested us, challenged us, and revealed a truth neither of us could ignore. That connection, courage, and empathy are more powerful than fear, judgment, or wealth. I remember looking at him, really looking, seeing past the suit, the status, the polished exterior, into the person beneath. He saw me too, not the poor girl people whispered about, not the invisible girl who struggled to sell trinkets on the street, but me. Me with dreams, Me with a heart that refused to be silenced. Me with courage that had been hiding beneath layers of fear for far too long. And in that shared understanding, the tension, the struggle, the injustice, it all softened just enough for something real to grow. I realized then that the world still had its barriers. People would still judge me, still whisper, still close doors in my face. He would still face scrutiny from his own circles, still question his choices in a society obsessed with rules, status, and appearances. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much. What mattered was the bond we had formed, fragile but undeniable, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by courage. It was proof that the invisible walls the world constructs can be broken, even if only for a moment, if you dare to. Stand tall. And it wasn't just about us. It was about what we had witnessed, about the injustices we had confronted, about the reality that so many people like me live with every single day, ignored, dismissed, or treated as less than human. The hug, the courage, the defiance, it was a reminder that even small moments can ripple outward, that standing up for someone, even when the world tells you not to, can change the course of a life. It can open doors, even in places where none seem to exist. I felt a mix of relief, pride, and a deep, quiet joy that I had never known before. The city could still be cruel, still be indifferent, but I had proven to myself that I could endure, that I could fight, that I could claim my right to be seen. And he had proven that even someone with everything in the world could still learn, still care, still risk everything for what is right. Walking home that night, I let the cool air wash over me, the lights of the city flickering above like tiny sparks of possibility. I thought about all the moments that had led me here, the whispers, the stares, the closed doors, the tiny acts of kindness, and of course, the hug. It was all connected, like a chain that had led to this exact moment. I had survived the injustice, the fear, the judgment, and I had come out stronger, more aware, and more alive than ever before. I realized that life is fragile, fleeting, and unpredictable. That sometimes the smallest actions, a touch, a word, a glance, can set off events that change everything. That even in a world full of barriers, prejudice, and indifference, courage and empathy have the power to break through. And I also realized that this wasn't just my story or his. It was a story that belongs to so many people whose lives are shaped by similar forces, whose struggles are invisible, whose victories are rarely celebrated. And so, I leave this story here, not with all the answers, but with a question on that lingers in the heart. How many lives go unseen? How many moments of courage go unnoticed? And how many opportunities to show empathy are ignored every single day? Could a single act of kindness, a single choice to break the rules of society, ripple out far enough to change the world, even if only for one person? I believe it can. I know it can, because it happened to me, because it happened to us. And as I stand here, reflecting on everything that has happened, I feel a sense of hope I didn't know I was capable of feeling. I know the road ahead will still be full of challenges, that the world is rarely kind to those who defy its expectations. But I also know this: courage, empathy, and connection are powerful forces. They are forces that can bridge gaps, break down walls, and bring people together in ways the world might never expect. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough to change not just one life, but many. I look back at the city one last time before turning to go, and I think about the hug that started it all. A simple, accidental moment that became extraordinary. A moment that proved even the smallest gestures can carry immense power. and I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, never underestimate the courage of someone who refuses to be invisible. Never doubt the ripple effect of empathy, and never forget that even in the darkest moments, hope can find a way.